Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is Bloomberg Businessweek Daily, reporting from the magazine that helps global leaders stay ahead, with insight on the people, companies, and trends shaping today's complex economy, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. The Bloomberg Businessweek Daily podcast with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, you know our big story. There's a couple of them, but this is really the big one, is certainly when it comes to investors. President Trump threatening a sweeping 50% tariff on the European Union, a 25% levy on Apple. Of course, Charlie digging into this as well throughout the day. If the tech giant failed to move iPhone manufacturing to the United States, we're talking about Apple here, reigniting investor fears about his trade agenda. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent speaking earlier with Bloomberg Wall Street Week host David Weston. They talked about the overall tariff strategy, but they also talked about what already he is seeing as a result of these tariffs. Check it out.
We have substantial revenue coming in now, and there is, at some point, there's an equilibrium rate, let's call it a Laffer curve for tariffs. And I think we will reach that rate. The other thing that's happening is a lot of their tariff barriers or non-tariff trade barriers. A lot of these non-tariff trade barriers are coming down, so friction's decreasing there. And again, because we don't know where these tariff negotiations are going to end up, they won't end up being scored. But it's several $100 million a year, several $100 billion a year of revenue that will be used. For every $100 billion, that's $100 billion less of bonds that Treasury has to issue.
When you talk about uncertainty and getting more certainty because of the tax bill, some of the uncertainty, a lot of it is because of tariffs right now, because we're not exactly sure where we're going to end up. Do you have a sense when the economic community, the business community, will get better certainty on tariffs?
Well, we've done the 90-day pause. As I mentioned several times, we have 18 important trading partners. So what everyone should really focus on are those. We've done a deal with the UK. My sense is over the next couple of weeks, we're going to have several large deals announced. We have put a pause and a 90-day pause with China. I expect that we will be negotiating in person with them again. And then the president today, when we initiated the pause and the 10% are moving down from the April 2nd rate to the 10% level, was contingent on countries or trading blocs coming and negotiating in good faith. And I think the president was getting frustrated with the EU. The problem with the EU, I've said several times, they have a collective action problem. There are 27 countries. They all have different needs. The Germans, they are interested in cars, the French in agriculture. And then you have Brussels negotiating with them.
All right, that, of course, was U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent earlier today on Bloomberg Television, Bloomberg Radio, across our platforms with Bloomberg Wall Street Week host David Weston. Hey, before we get a little bit more into what we are getting out of the White House, we do want to mention crossing the Bloomberg terminal, a red headline, Oracle to buy $40 billion of NVIDIA chips for an open AI U.S. data center. This is according to the FT, the Financial Times. So Oracle, Tim, it looks like buying around 400,000 of NVIDIA's GB200 chips. This is then with, I guess, some plans for Oracle to lease the computing power to OpenAI. So a little bit of a deal flow there. Yeah,
I'm just looking at shares of Oracle. Spiked a little bit higher on this news, down about 0.1%. NVIDIA shares also off their lows of the day, but Carol, still down 0.3%. All
right, folks. And again, according to the FT. All right, let's get back to certainly tariffs, trade, chips. That is definitely a connection there. Right now, though, we're focused on the trade relationship when it comes to the European Union. With more on the latest tariff talk and why it's happening now, we head to the Bloomberg News Washington, D.C. Bureau and White House editor Jordan Fabian. Jordan, why the escalation? Why is it happening now? I mean, part of me almost wonders, is this to divert attention from the concerns over the ballooning deficit as the Trump spending and tax bill makes its way through Congress? I mean, help me out here.
Yeah, Carol, why now is an interesting question. For the past couple weeks, you had the president seemingly indicating that he was looking for an off-ramp on these tariffs, saying last week when he was in the Middle East that he was essentially going to send a bunch of letters out to countries setting tariff rates and then moving on. But there are still a number of people who are negotiating with the U.S., namely the EU. There is a call happening today between U.S. and EU trade negotiators, and some EU officials believe that this could be a negotiating tactic by the president, essentially throwing out a maximalist number out there before this phone call to try and gain leverage on the EU.
Yeah, the big question I have is whether or not this is part of the so-called art of the deal, as Carol mentioned. I think one thing that's pretty striking to me about this is the June 1st deadline here. We're just days away from that, Jordan. That doesn't give much time for the EU to come back with a solution.
No, and in fact, Tim, there is a large package of retaliatory tariffs that the EU has teed up if these negotiations go sideways. So if the president actually means what he says and follows through on that 50% tariff threat by June 1st, the EU hasn't said what they're going to do, but I would imagine they would put those retaliatory tariffs in motion. So duties going on popular American products like whiskey and motorcycles and some of our most iconic products that are exported to the EU.
What is going on inside the White House right now? And, you know, we obviously, our David Weston had a big conversation with Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who seems to be the voice that the world is continually turning to kind of say, help me make sense out of all of this. And maybe it's not so bad. But, you know, just trying to understand the president's strategy. And, you know, is it just, Jordan, this idea that, you know, keeping everybody a little bit on edge?
There's certainly something to that. And frankly, Carol, I don't see a whole grand strategy behind what the president is doing. A lot of it, to me, smacks as retaliation, revenge. You know, the EU is a bloc, an entity that he's long had an issue with, and this is his way of getting back at them. And so, you know, when you hear Scott Bessent try to impose some sort of logic and reason on that, and then you listen to what the president says, there is a disconnect. You know, he's talking about this Laffer curve for tariffs. It doesn't seem to me that the president is thinking in that way at all. I mean, if anything, it's more of a Goldilocks approach where, you know, each day the number is different, you know, depending on whether it's, you know, too hot or too cold for his liking.
You know, speaking of what the president wants, in a separate post, he also mentioned, and we're talking Apple here, he also mentioned that he wants to see Apple make iPhones that are bound for the U.S. here in the U.S., not in India, as Apple has been moving production to different parts of the world for U.S.-bound iPhones. We've reported a lot on this with our own Mark Gurman, who's also mentioned that it is a far cry and a tall task, I should say, for Apple to actually do that here in the U.S. Why do you think he's making these comments right now, Jordan?
Well, again, you know, I keep going back to that retaliation, revenge aspect. You know, the big tech is an entity that he's really, again, had an issue with over the past few years, and he's taken aim at big tech CEOs from Mark Zuckerberg to Jeff Bezos to Tim Cook. And he had a meeting this week with Tim Cook. You heard the president last week when he was in the Middle East complain about Apple's plan to move production to India away from China for the Apple's iPhone exports to the U.S. And, you know, as much as he wants that production to be here, you know, there's a few problems. It'll take years getting all those factories over here. There's not a trained workforce in the United States to produce those iPhones.
Right.
Not to mention what the cost would be selling those iPhones into the U.S. market from U.S. factories. So not necessarily something you snap your fingers and it happens overnight.
Well, there's something to be said that when you go after one of the world's largest market cap companies, I mean, Apple and NVIDIA always kind of trading back and forth their places, it gets everybody's attention. Same thing with when it comes to academia, go after Harvard, right? Like it's a massive giant, like you get everybody's attention in terms of maybe what the White House is trying to achieve. Hey, listen, so appreciate it. Jordan, thank you. Jordan Fabian, White House editor at Bloomberg News there in our DC bureau.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Businessweek Daily podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Or watch us live on YouTube.
Well, you know this if you've been watching or listening to us over the last 90 minutes. President Trump Friday signing orders meant to accelerate the construction of nuclear power plants, including small untested designs that offer the promise of rapid deployment, but have yet to be built in the U.S. It certainly makes sense, given the increase in demand we are set to see for energy. The question that a lot of people have, though, is what are we going to do with all that nuclear waste? Well, Deep Isolation says we bury it deep underground, and they're working on it. We got Rodney Baltzer with us, CEO of Deep Isolation. He joins us from Plano, Texas. Also with us here in the Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio is Bloomberg News energy reporter Will Wade. Will, I want to start with you because when you think about waste, what are the things we need to be thinking about?
We need to think about something that is long-term, like really long-term. This stuff is dangerous for centuries, for longer than any of us will be around. So you need to look for a permanent solution. And that's something that we've all been working a lot. Really, Finland is the only country I know of that's got something they've worked on, a deep underground repository for the waste. Everywhere else in the U.S., it pretty much just sits out behind the reactors where they used it.
Yeah. Happy Friday, everybody, if you weren't freaked out. Hey, Rod,
don't go to the reactors. I mean, it's pretty simple.
I mean, it's not like it's radioactive. They're in these like gigantic concrete canisters. I've been there, but
as long as there's no crack or anything, right?
They're designed to last for a really long time, but they just sit out there and take up space. There's some power plants where they built the power plant, used the power plant, finished the power plant, took it apart, cleaned it up. The only thing left
is
a couple dozen or more of these giant concrete storage canisters just sit there.
All right, that's what Deep Isolation is working on. Rod, come on in on the conversation. Tell us a little bit about what you guys are doing specifically when it comes to nuclear waste, because we know kind of, as Will so well spelled out, what's being done now. How are you guys approaching it, and what can you do differently?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. So Deep Isolation is different. What the world has typically done, like Will said, in Finland, giant mine repositories. They take decades. They're very expensive. Administrations change. They get bogged down in politics, and they're just really hard to implement and really costly. And so Deep Isolation looked around and said, man, directional drilling has really come a long way in the last 20 years. What if we married that with nuclear waste handling that we've been doing for decades as well? Make sure we don't drop anything, make sure we integrate those two really mature technologies, and then we can go deeper, which is safer and extends for those really long periods of time. And
directional drilling, you mean this is basically the same technology we use for fracking, right?
It's the same kind of technology, but we don't frack. So we want that formation to be pristine. We don't want to break that rock open like you do with fracking.
So you still have to find somebody's backyard to put it in. And even if it's deep underground, I get the sense that states, cities, countries still won't want it. Where do you put it?
Yeah, and so that's where it's kind of fascinating. For a mine repository, it had to be centralized, and you pretty much had to take all of the waste from the entire nation. So we were going to put it at Yucca Mountain, Nevada, and Nevada did not want it. But now it's stuck at all these reactors across the U.S. So there's communities that already have it in their backyard. The question is, do you want to keep it up there and just look at it, or do you want to put it safe underground where it would be better disposed of? What we're also seeing is internationally, there's a lot of interest from smaller countries that don't have a lot of nuclear of co-locating this with the reactors, so you don't have to transport it through nuclear neighborhoods or communities.
I still didn't hear, though, where exactly you put it. I know that it's not, Yucca Mountain has not worked out for the last, almost 40 years at this point. It's pretty remarkable that it goes back that far. But where in the U.S. can you put it?
But right now, you can't put it anywhere except Yucca Mountain. There's a the Nuclear Waste Policy Act says thou shalt only dispose of spent fuel at Yucca Mountain, Nevada. So in the U.S., we're stuck. And so I think, as you see, like these executive orders come out, it'd be great to see some of those with nuclear for the waste side and make some progress on it to allow us to look for another site. We can't even look for one yet.
Listen, years ago, 25, 30 years, I'm dating myself, but doing a whole thing about Yucca Mountain, and because people were upset and trying to figure out what do we do with all the waste that's already there. And here we are, how many years later? Will, why is, from your reporting, and then I want to bring Rod back, underground, deep underground, why is that a good solution?
Well, it's pretty safe down there.
Is it?
Yeah, I would
think so. So even like earthquakes, tremors, like none of that stuff is felt there?
You know what? That's actually a better question for Rod. And my question for Rod is, give us a sense, like, how deep are we talking here?
So we're talking about a mile deep. This is about twice as deep as a mine repository. And so deep isolation has done a lot of safety calculations and looked at, when you put the waste that deep and, in a generic kind of formation, a shale formation, how long does it take for that to migrate somewhere? Eventually that canister corrodes and that waste goes somewhere. And our calculations show that the peak dose to somebody on the surface would be 1.6 million years into the future and be 1,000 times less than a regulatory limit of 10 millirem. 10 millirem is about a chest X-ray, so 1,000 times less than that is very, very minimal. And it just shows you that much depth, that much rock provides so much safety and a buffer for such a long period of time.
So when we have it in the storage canisters on the surface, the safety comes from the couple of feet of concrete and steel that are protecting it. It sounds like your safety play is we're going to put it so far away that it's not going to bother anyone?
Yeah, ours is the billion tons of rock that's on top of our formation instead of the feet of concrete. And nuclear waste is stored safely. It doesn't smell, thank goodness, or people would really be upset about it being just hanging out there. But it's stored safely. And so, ours is we can make it permanent. Let's stop spending $2.2 billion a year in the U.S. on storage and do something on the disposal aspect.
Here in New York City, when it gets to the environmental review process, if they want to turn some sort of area that perhaps used to be a factory or a gas station into apartments, there's this remediation process that has to take place because some of what was there over the last 100 or so years has seeped into the ground, and it's become an issue. It's certainly an issue in a large part of Brooklyn right now, for example. How do you ensure that 100 years from now, your solution will still hold? Because really it's untested over that length of time, and the nuclear waste will not have seeped into the area around it or contaminated the groundwater, for example.
Yeah, we have nuclear facilities that have been open for more than 70 years, storage for more than 60 years. And so we've got some experience with, how do you create the engineering barriers around that? Ours is trying to take that plus the drilling technology and just move it all super deep underground so that it is, nowhere near the surface. So when you're doing that surface testing, this is a mile deeper than that. It's well below any kind of drinking water aquifers or anything else. Just get it out of the biosphere.
So tell us how much work you guys are already doing. And because if it's so good, like, are people queuing up to say, listen, we're going to need you to do this for us? So give us an idea of the business that you're seeing.
Yeah, so what we've done is we've designed a universal canister system. And so this canister will take a spent fuel assembly, whether it's a legacy reactor or some of the new advanced reactors and the new fuel types, and it'll enclose that waste. And that allows us to put it either in a storage or transport container for a surface if we need to move that around or store it temporarily, or dispose of it in a mine repository or a borehole deep underground. And so we've actually produced those both in the U.S. and the U.K., and we've tested those near surface to make sure that they work. They fit inside the drilling casings. They get handled with oil and gas equipment. We've done corrosion testing and things on these, and so we know they're robust and ready to go. Our customers have told us we need to do a full-size, full-scale at-depth demonstration. We've done a small-scale at-depth and full-size at the surface, but go deep. And so that's our next step, is finding the funding to go do that next step and make progress on this issue.
What's the main barrier you see to actually getting this used? Is it still developing the technology? Is it finding a customer willing to try it? Or I suspect one of the biggest one is getting regulatory approval to let anyone use it.
Yeah, we've got a lot of interest from customers. We see the technology as being pretty mature. We do think it's the first mover and the regulatory aspect alongside that. So, like we said, in the U.S., there's some complications. We do think our technology is probably exported and done internationally first, but we do see that there's openings for that, and that there can be progress made in the next 3 or 4 years.
What does it cost to do this? How expensive is it?
So this is less than half the cost of a mined repository. So it's, general rule of thumb is probably about $1 billion per reactor for spent nuclear fuel disposal as you look at kind of reactor sites, and we're less than half that cost. And so when you're a small country or you're looking at new nuclear or anything and you want to have an economic solution, this is one that you could afford to implement.
One last question I'm also curious, Rod, is how do you keep it safe? Like what's the procedure for checking on it, making sure that once it's built, it continues to be safe? And if there's a problem, is it easy to fix it?
Yeah, so we do build retrievability into our product. So if you found out after the fact that for whatever reason you missed something and it wasn't safe, you could retrieve it and pull it back to the surface. So it is retrievable, it's reversible. Likewise, if new technology came along and you really wanted to reprocess this, you could do that as well. But for us, we also have a lot of monitoring. We've got a lot of patents and IP around monitoring, both during operations and post-closure. So what is that temperature, pressure, the radiation like at depth over a long period of time?
Cool stuff. Thank you so much. Rod Balzer, he's CEO of Deep Isolation, and our thanks to Will Wade, also weighing in there, Bloomberg News energy reporter. Thanks to you.
This is the Bloomberg Businessweek Daily Podcast. Listen live each weekday starting at 2 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
We want to get into one of the themes that has definitely been front and center. It came out at Milken, but Tim and I have had a lot of guests on this, and it was just about 1 year ago that our Bloomberg Pursuits team did a deep dive into the business of longevity, reporting on a host of startups that promise a longer, better life at a price. And they also asked about this health span movement, asking whether it was just more than just a money grab or something much more instrumental for individuals and a better way of living.
Celebrities are certainly into it. We know wealthy folks are into it. I mean, who doesn't want to live longer? A key to living longer, many would argue, is preventative care, catching illness and disease early. And Carol, it's safe to say, our next guest certainly falls into that category.
All right, with us is Jill Woodworth. She's former CFO of Peloton. She recently joined Preventative as Chief Financial Officer. The company makes MRI scanning for early detection of health problems, think body scans and more. Also with us, of course, is our own Nina Trentman. She's senior editor at Bloomberg News. She's the author of the CFO Briefing newsletter, which comes out every Sunday. You can find it at Bloomberg.com/CFO briefing. Hey guys, thank you so much. Jill, of course, Nina, thank you. Hey Jill, we want to get into what you guys are doing at Preventative. We're kind of obsessed with what you are doing and want to know more about the business and where it goes. I got to go look back there just for one moment. You're at Peloton from 2018 to 2022. You saw the company at its heights. You saw that it under pressure. A lot of buying during the pandemic. I've got one, full transparency, bought it before the pandemic. Tell us about that ride, though.
Well, thank you for having me, and very pleased to be here and to talk about what Preventative is doing, and absolutely happy to talk about Peloton. I think very similarly, both are changing people's lives. With Peloton, it was introducing physical and mental well-being, and obviously with Preventative, extending my passion for health and wellness into early detection of disease. But at Peloton, prior to COVID, it was actually a fairly predictable but high growth business. And as you probably know, we scaled from, 200 million in revenue to over 4 billion during COVID. And it was a black swan event. And, Peloton seemed to be at the center of the storm. And we had to make a lot of investments to serve the backlog of customers. Just to give you a sense of scale, overnight, it felt like when COVID hit, our sales increased 9-fold. Wow. Literally
no
overnight.
Pressure there.
And and we had a decision to make. It was serve those customers who wanted some outlet during those very dark days for physical and mental well-being. And so we scaled every part of the organization. It was a highly vertically integrated model. We delivered our bikes, we made our bikes and treads, and every part of the organization had to change. We even had to move cameras into our instructors' homes for a couple of months so that we could continue to make fresh content, which our members loved. So it was certainly, looking back, an incredible time. And I feel like we just tried to serve our members as best as we could. And of course, it did, with all of those fixed costs getting implemented, for those 18 months where we had very, very high sustained demand. It did take some time to unwind that. But I think as we look back, we did it for the members.
Yeah, Jill, thanks for joining us. And maybe I can jump in here. Talk to us a little bit about your new role. Prenuvo, if I'm understanding it correctly, is privately owned at this point. Like, what are your plans as CFO for the company? And could you at some point look towards an IPO?
So I think everybody knows what Prenuvo does. I think just very basically, I'd like to say what we're trying to do is reimagine the annual physical and bringing MRI to the mainstream. And, part of the reason why I joined was actually going through the diligence process. I had my own scan. It was incredibly eye-opening. Thankfully, nothing serious, but a lot of things that I need to keep an eye on and things that I can proactively do, not necessarily to increase my longevity, but really increase my quality of life. And so what I think the company is doing is important. And right now, today, the company, is still small. It's private. We have 20 clinics across the U.S. And what I'm excited to partner with the management team on is the various vectors for growth. So we are going to continue rolling out clinics across the United States. Mm-hmm. We're looking at some international locations as well. We see demand from people coming overseas to visit our clinics as well. So that is one vector, that I think we can responsibly grow and scale pretty efficiently. I think the other interesting aspect is we have more products that we can offer. We started rolling out blood biomarkers in California and New York, and our plan is to include blood work along with MRI. And if you do both, you have a 95% picture of your health. And so for us, we will be rolling that out nationally and over the course of the next few months. So new products and different ways to serve our customers is also in focus. And so as a CFO, I want to make sure that the company is well capitalized and that we're analyzing these different ways to grow in a responsible way so that we can operationalize them and also just make sure that we continue to make a great experience for the customers that walk in our door and that our insights are helpful.
Jill, I want to talk about some of those insights in a minute, but I'm going to go through some pricing here just because I know everybody listening or watching is wondering. Prices range for a torso scan about 25 minutes from about $1,000 up to enhanced screening for full body. If you're in the New York area, it's about $4,500. That's about a 60-minute scan, according to your website. Right now, insurance does not cover, in my understanding, this type of preventative scan. If, in your view, it is indeed something that you want to make part of an annual physical and you see a benefit, why, in your view, does insurance not cover this stuff?
Well, the healthcare system, unfortunately, has waited for something to go wrong historically. And we're trying to change that model where customers can take health into their own hands. And so we are hopeful, but not reliant on health insurance seeing the validity of a whole body MRI. But there's 2 points I'll make. One, we are continuing to build out an enterprise sales motion. So going to companies who may offer this as a benefit to their employees, either subsidizing or paying for the service. And I think most large employers are self-insured, and offering Prenuvo as a benefit can actually bring down their costs through early detection in terms of what they might have to pay out in the future if some of these early detections of diseases aren't caught early. And then I would say we're also, trying to bring down our cost of our service over time. We're a vertically integrated model, right? We have specialized MRI machines. We have 100 radiologists on staff who are trained in whole body MRI reading. And when you get your results, we have a doctor or a nurse practitioner go through those results in detail to make sure that you understand them, and we send them on to their physicians as needed. So it's a very, very comprehensive, high-touch service.
All right. So I have to go back. It's kind of one of those things in journalism, like, wait a minute, the elephant in the living room. Like when you said that you found a couple things and thank God nothing serious in your testing, but I'm just curious, like what was found? And I'm just, in terms of the findings generally yourself, but also more broadly, does it tend to catch things kind of early on that really do make a difference in a health outcome? But for you, what was found? I'm curious. Can we ask?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to share. Hopefully it's not too much information, but I would venture to say most of us have a lot of degeneration in our spine that's well ahead of our age. We sit behind desks, we don't stand up, we don't exercise enough. And so there were a lot of issues pointed out with respect to the health of my spine. And ever since I got my scan, I now take physical therapy seriously. I take mobility seriously. I used to just hop on the Peloton tread, do a boot camp and call it a day. I'm stretching more. I'm now focused on Pilates and yoga. So but that could seriously impact living out your 50s, 60s, and 70s in a very healthy way if you don't address some of those issues now. We look at every organ. We can detect small aneurysms. I found out I have some mild arthritis in my shoulders, which probably isn't abnormal for my age, but I'm learning different ways to compensate for that now with respect to my fitness training. So again, nothing alarming, but it was really helpful to know. I think most of us would probably be surprised to get the scan and realize how much you can actually slow down that degeneration.
Jill, talk to us a little bit about the journey for the company. You said you have 20 clinics right now. You're looking to open new clinics across the U.S. and potentially also outside of the U.S. Like, in how far is preparing this company for a public listing one of the goals that you have as a CFO?
Yeah, that's not on the roadmap now, but I think what we'd like to do is prepare for every optionality, and so I want to make sure the company is capitalized today, whether that be debt or equity in the private markets, so that we have every option to be available to us over time. But right now, IPO is not necessarily on the table. But again, it's all about keeping options open.
Hey, Jill, last question, because we got to run only 30 seconds here. You mentioned 100 radiologists on staff at this point. I think of radiology, I think that's prime for disruption by AI. When do those radiologists get replaced by AI?
Well, we disrupt ourselves, right? We already have AI embedded into a lot of the reports that we're generating. We think of it right now as an efficiency tool. And could there be a day where AI could read an MRI report? 100%. But from our perspective, that's a long way off. Okay. But for us, it's about just improving their efficiency so that we can bring down the cost over time. And those are things that we're already implementing and will continue to implement.
Listen, so cool. We hope you will come back. We know you're getting settled in, and we really appreciate you giving us some time. But do come back and let us know how the business is going and growing. Look forward to it. Jill Woodworth, she is Prenuvo Chief Financial Officer, joining us on this Friday from New York. And of course, thanks to our own Nina Tretman, Senior Editor at Bloomberg News, author of the CFO Briefing newsletter. You can find it at Bloomberg.com/CFO Briefing, a new one coming out this Sunday.
This is the Bloomberg Businessweek Daily Podcast. Available on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Listen live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, TuneIn, and the Bloomberg Business app. You can also watch us live every weekday on YouTube and always on the Bloomberg Terminal.